What's going on, everybody? Thanks for checking in with Callie. Happy MLK Day. Like, subscribe if you haven't already. So, we talk about James Harden and Ty Lue. And the strategy that Ty Lue has for James Harden and the way he's playing right now is good. But ultimately, you have to ask yourself, will it be able to help the Clippers in regards to translation to the playoffs and getting the best out of James Harden in the playoffs? That's the question I have. After looking at, some things against the Timberwolves in last night's game, you could see where, of course, some good spots, some bad spots, and you could, depict through other games as well, in regards to how James Harden's been playing, in which he's been playing very good, passing the ball, facilitating, understanding his role, being, who he wants to be. And, here, as you see, he speaks on, being free. Ty Lue allowing him to be free in the offense, expressing himself the way he likes to on the floor in regards to how he plays, and, letting him basically be the system in, rather than what he had in Philadelphia with Doc Rivers. Ty Lue seems to understand James Harden more and understands how to get the best out of James Harden more. The only problem that could come with this is when you let James Harden get too comfortable with how he plays and, things like that. That's fine. But you remember, he's still one of your top 4 players on this team, probably top 3, amongst, the 4. But even with all that said, I'm just not exactly sure you'll get the best out of James Harden when it comes time for the playoffs and when it matters most. Because if you're just going off of, and like I said, this is a small sample size. This is not really a big, deal at this time, but this is a small sample size. There's been a few games this year, but we're going to point to the one that's most recent, which is the Timberwolves. When you look at that game there, yeah, it could have been an off night by James Harden, which it probably was. And, him and PG really struggled really badly. But there again, that's one of those test type situations. And when you're tested by teams that are the top seeds and teams that play defense a certain way, teams with more length, teams that challenge you from as soon as you step over the half court line before you get into your sets and don't allow you to get comfortable, will you get the best out of James Harden then? And looking at against the Timberwolves last night, in a lot of ways, he, still did some good things slightly, but they really made him look uncomfortable really for the most part. And I think that was more so their strategy, because you can't stop Kawhi Leonard. You really can't stop, PG when they're really, on and they're going. But well, maybe more so PG, because PG is more streaky. He's a streaky shooter, and streaky shooters, they have moments and times, and they go through stretches where they look really, really good, but then they go through stretches where they look really, really piss poor. That's the difference between a streaky shooter and a consistent shooter, a consistent guy like a Kawhi Leonard. You know what you're getting out of Kawhi Leonard every single night that he steps on the floor, and it looks so rare when Kawhi does struggle, in which, against the Timberwolves last night, he didn't. He had 26 and 9. He shot like 46% from the field. I mean, he was doing good. He had a couple steals. That's just Kawhi being Kawhi. But my thing is, the system being James Harden, that system has to work against the better teams. It can't just work against mediocre teams. It can't just work against teams, within the regular season that came off a back-to-back that might be tired, just like maybe the Clippers might have been, last night, the way it looked in the second half of that game more so. It really in the game period. But my point is, you have to be able to translate that within, against better teams. And sometimes I think, of course, a coach should let a player be himself, but a coach should also be able to make adjustments in regards to how that player attacks, the opposing team. And looking at this game overall, you could depict where a team like the Timberwolves, their length and their size and their savviness, with certain guys, even all the way down to, from as high up as, Anthony Edwards and, some of the guys, Rudy Gobert, all the way down to a Mike Conley, the savviness and the size and the way they attack people, the way they attack other teams on defense and how they try to come at you is, with force. And when you force James Harden to do certain things that he doesn't like, that's when his game doesn't translate well in regards to helping his team be better and win. And that's the only little, quirk or question I have about James Harden. As Ty Lue is the coach, you have to find ways to, get the best out of him playing against better competition. And letting him be himself is fine, but also putting him in positions where he's kind of uncomfortable at times and letting him learn how to flourish within those would actually, possibly help the Clippers if James Harden is willing to go through that and willing to learn that. Because obviously maybe he wasn't willing to do that with Doc Rivers, which I don't really blame him because I don't think Doc Rivers is that good of a coach. And I definitely question Ty Lue as well because he's a product of Doc Rivers. Only difference is he's a little bit more lenient in how he coaches because he believes in letting players be free and kind of do their own thing. And, hopefully he gets the best out of them and hopefully they come through and save the day for his legacy, in which LeBron and Kyrie did years ago on Cleveland, because being down 3-1 against the Warriors in that finals really wasn't a good look. I mean, honestly, you got the so-called GOAT, greatest player of all time in some people's mind, which isn't mine. I'm still Jordan, but you got the so-called GOAT in, LeBron James. And, you had Kyrie, which is like one of the best scorers in the league, still is. And you had a pretty good supporting cast around them that they felt confident with. And, you still found yourself in a situation like that. And making adjustments, as I said before, is not something that Ty Lue has ever been good at, even back then all the way up to now. So my point is, when the system doesn't work, when you're playing against a team that's just as good as the Clippers and a team that matches up with them very well, what adjustments do you make then? Do you allow James Harden to just be James Harden and keep struggling? Because that's the problem with James Harden's game. Because he says he's the system, he is, but the system always seems to have a malfunction or a failure against better competition at times, especially in big moments in the playoffs. And last night was just a snippet of what we could see in the playoffs with James Harden, because that's why we've always noticed James Harden could be the MVP in the regular season, but in the playoffs, he'll play good. But when certain teams really give him, a different look and they approach it from a different standpoint, how they guard him and how they guard other players, and don't allow just easy passes to get through the lane and the pick and roll just to be so easily effective, it can really affect James Harden, within that series. Now, of course, I will give James Harden credit. They didn't, and I'll give the Clippers some credit. They didn't have Big Zoo, but honestly, Big Zoo is not like a top 10 player in the league. He's not an Anthony Davis. He's not a, Giannis Antetokounmpo. So, I mean, between Daniel Tice and or Mason Plumlee, you're good enough to still go out there and compete at a decent level with at the 5 position. You really are. Because Zoo, while he's been playing good and everything like that, he's still a little bit above average big man in the NBA. He's not a star big man in the NBA or nowhere near a superstar like a Joel Embiid or Jokic or somebody like that. He's not on that level. So even with that being said, Zoo does make a little bit of a difference because he will bang and get some boards and things like that. But there are times where everything doesn't go so perfect. I mean, it could be a situation like that in the playoffs where Zoo might miss a couple games because of an injury, and James Harden, because he plays so good with the pick and roll with the big man, and that basically opens up areas of his game to be able to allow other players and feed other players the ball the way he wants to. It's going to be situations where it's not always ideal, not always perfect. And that's where you have to really be able to, count on James Harden to be the player that you went out and got him to be in the playoffs. You know what I'm saying? So, and that's the reason why I think James Harden has struggled some in the playoffs, because when other teams make adjustments against what he likes to do well, he doesn't make an adjustment. And that's what the Clippers are going to have to try to figure out. If you're going to try to beat some of these better teams in the West and try to make it all the way to the finals, you're going to have to figure out how to be able to make an adjustments to get the best out of players like him, because he's never won a championship before. So, I mean, his game is his game. He thinks that's the only way it goes. And when he's struggling, I mean, the defensive effort isn't there. And, even though he is a great player, I'm never going to take that from him. It's flaws in his game that a lot of people don't see, which is the reason why he's never, came close to a championship, except one time with OKC when he was a 6-man off the bench way back in his early days with Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook being on OKC. And they went against the Miami Heat and ultimately lost 4-1. But my point is, they're going to have to really figure out ways to, allow James Harden to, pick up the pace and understand how to play even when everything isn't ideal. When you don't have Zubac there, you still should be able to be a little bit more effective. You should be able to find your shot a lot easier. You should be able to, understand what the defense is giving you. And you should know when Zubac isn't there or the big man that you feed off of with the pick and roll, you have to be a little bit more aggressive in regards to your scoring and how you approach the game, knowing that, you don't have one of your selective pieces and you have to be able to make that adjustment. But also Ty Lue has to be able to inform him to make that adjustment because, no matter what team they play or where they are, Kawhi is going to be Kawhi. Kawhi is going to go out there and just play because he knows how to make adjustments himself. You don't really have to make an adjustment for Kawhi because he's won championships in this league and he knows what it takes to win and he knows how to do the little things at times to make his team better even when he isn't scoring. And that's what other players on the Clippers are going to have to figure out. They can't just rely on Kawhi to always do that. You're going to have to be able to step up and do that yourself because, as I said, you look at somebody like Paul George as well. Against the better competition in a lot of games this year, he didn't shoot a good percentage. He doesn't shoot as well. Some games he did. I'm not taking nothing from him, but when you see against better competition, guys who really get up in him and defend him, like McDaniels did, the so-called the Wasp is what they call him on that team is his nickname, but he really defended Paul George really well. He really didn't let Paul George breathe much. He really was in Paul George's sights every time. And then they switched off some with Anthony Edwards. And, it was just a little bit of a rotation. But Paul George really bothered. And, some shots just didn't go down because they didn't. That's just how it goes at times. But as I said before, playing better competitions when you got to show up the most and when you got to show out the most. And I've seen Kawhi do it many times. I've seen all these other players do it many times. But I've seen Kawhi do it in the playoffs, in the finals. I haven't seen these other guys do it like that consistently on that level. And James Harden, with him being the focal point of the offense because he's the facilitator, he's going to have to be one of the main ones to be able to make that adjustment, even more so than Paul George, definitely more so than Russell Westbrook, because like I said, you already know what Kawhi is going to give you. 9 times out of 10, Kawhi is going to be the most consistent on that team. And that's just the way it is because he's just that great of a player and the superstar that he is. So got to give him his flowers for that. But definitely the system with James Harden is going to have to be adjusted when you play better competition. And I hope by the time the playoffs come, they'll be able to figure out a way to do that, because if they don't, they might find themselves in a dogfight in certain situations, in certain matchups where it's like, dang, the Clippers should be the team up 4-1 in this series. But the series ultimately is tied 3-3 and game 7, winner take all. You don't want to be in those situations, especially with all the talent that the Clippers have. So, I mean, the little things, the intangibles are something small right now, but they can become tangibles over time. So I really hope that the Clippers understand what's in front of them. I really hope that Ty Lue sees these things and make these adjustments if he's going to. I don't know if he will, because I don't believe in his adjustment status or adjustment credibility, but hopefully he does. And hopefully, ultimately the system works out in the Clippers' favor.